Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating journey, one that takes us from worldly distress all the way to spiritual peace. We're going to unpack a really rich, multi-layered discussion from a men's biblical fellowship. The source material we're looking at today beautifully weaves together ancient texts, candid personal reflections, and some strikingly relevant modern-day parallels. It's essentially a deep dive into how we can ground ourselves when the world around us feels, well, entirely chaotic. So let's just jump right in and set the stage with a question that gets right to the heart of the matter. So let me ask you something right off the bat. What is it that makes you come alive? It's a profound question, right? The speakers reference this from a book called Wild at Heart, and it's our starting point today. Think about it. If you asked 10 different people on the street, you'd probably get 10 completely different answers. For some, maybe it's crushing a massive goal at work, or maybe it's the thrill of crossing the finish line at an athletic event. But our source discussion really challenges us to think way beyond those temporary secular passions. Because as great as our jobs and our hobbies are, they're fleeting. What actually happens when those things are taken away? What makes you come alive then? Well, there's actually an incredible ancient text that provides a profound answer to this exact question. This is Psalm 73, verse 26, which says, "My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the rock of my heart and my portion forever." The speakers in our fellowship discussion break this down so beautifully. They explain that the ultimate answer to what should truly make us come alive is resting on that rock. Because let's be honest, our flesh and our human hearts are frail. We aren't perfect, and eventually we all fail. But having a spiritual foundation, having God as your rock, provides a portion, a gift that literally lasts forever, even when everything else completely falls apart. Okay, let's dive into this a bit deeper. What actually happens when our flesh and heart just fail? This specific psalm was written by Asaf, who was a prophet under King David. And Asaf was completely exhausted. He was burned out by the sheer amount of injustice he saw in the world around him. He was staring at society, seeing deep unfairness, and watching wicked people prosper while good people suffered. And he was stressing out, wondering, how could God possibly let this happen? It's this intense feeling of total mental and emotional burnout that comes from just staring at worldly problems. And you know what? That feeling hasn't changed in thousands of years. To put this into perspective, the speakers draw direct parallels to today's geopolitical landscape. They point to events like the invasion of Ukraine, destructive leadership in Iran, and violence against Christians in Africa. Now, they cite these specific examples to illustrate a really crucial point. Worldly injustice is timeless. So we're looking at a pretty clear dichotomy here that's central to the source discussion. On one side, you have the act of focusing entirely on outward worldly injustices, staring directly at all that chaos. That brings total exhaustion and a failing heart. But on the other side, you have the act of turning inward to spiritual strength. As one of the speakers notes, remembering the ultimate reality that God wins in the end, even if we don't see it happen in our own lifetime, brings a profound sense of peace. So, the big question is, how do we make that pivot? How do we stop doom-scrolling the chaos and actually start finding that peace? Right, so this brings us to the ultimate turning point, the solution to all that burnout, finding the sanctuary. Let's look at the exact moment where Asaf finally finds his answer. Just a few verses earlier, in Psalm 73:17, Asaf actually admits that trying to understand all the world's evil was just a completely troublesome, exhausting task. That is, quote, "until I went into the sanctuary of God." This right here is the ultimate anchor in the storm. The source discussion highlights this as a massive, dramatic shift. The second Asaph stepped into the sanctuary, his entire perspective shifted away from the outward chaos and locked onto eternal clarity. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is this sanctuary? The speakers do a great job of clearly defining this abstract concept for us, using two other biblical references. First, looking at Ephesians 2:22, the sanctuary is God's habitation within our own spirit, so it's a deeply internal reality. Second, based on 1 Timothy 3:15, it is literally the church and the fellowship of believers, meaning it's not just a physical building you walk into, it's a spiritual space inside you, combined with the literal community of believers around you. The guys in the fellowship mapped out what we can call the sanctuary pivot in 3 really logical steps. Step 1, you have to intentionally turn your eyes away from outward distractions and injustices. Step 2, enter the Spirit and join in fellowship with others. And step 3, in doing so, you receive divine revelation. One of the speakers emphatically notes that regular fellowship gives us the spiritual ears to hear and the spiritual eyes to see the actual solutions to our problems. You literally gain a totally new perception that you just cannot find while staring at the news.
All right, from here, the source audio smoothly transitions from this Old Testament realization to a really powerful New Testament parallel. We shift from Asaf over to the Apostle Paul in the book of Philippians, chapter 3. Paul underwent a radical perspective shift that heavily echoes Asaf's journey, but instead of focusing on worldly injustice, Paul's focus was on personal achievements and material wealth.
The crucial thing to understand here is the contrast between Paul's earthly life and his new spiritual view. Paul had an absolutely stellar earthly resume. He studied under the greatest minds. He was a super strict lawkeeper, a Pharisee, legally completely blameless. He had literally everything to boast about in the flesh. Yet, when he encountered Christ, his whole worldview flipped upside down. He looked at all of his massive earthly achievements and literally called them refuse, garbage, or loss. He realized that trying to achieve righteousness all on his own, through the law, was totally impossible and completely useless compared to the unsearchable riches of gaining Christ. The fellowship brings this ancient text right into the modern day with a pretty stark, candid realization about our own material wealth. They use a brand new road bike as an example to force a really blunt discussion about what actually happens to all the stuff we work so incredibly hard to acquire. Think about it. Your house, your car, your beautiful furniture. What happens to all of it in the long run? As the speakers note, with just a little bit of dark humor, it all faces one of three inevitable fates. Number one, it will eventually belong to someone else. Number two, it's going to end up locked away in a storage unit. Or number three, it's going straight to the landfill. It perfectly reinforces Paul's exact assertion. Every physical thing is temporary. Ultimately, it all just turns back into refuse.
And that brings us straight to the core takeaway from Philippians 3:8. I count all things to be lost on account of the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. The speakers make this super clear. Having nice things, experiencing success, being comfortable, none of that is inherently bad. But they emphasize that keeping these things in the correct order is absolutely crucial. If you start putting the house, the car, or that new road bike above your love for God and your true spiritual purpose, well, your focus is entirely backward. Your soul is literally the only thing you get to take with you. Now, keeping everything in the right order, yeah, that is way easier said than done. The speakers connect these ancient texts directly to our modern lives by warning us to beware of modern idols. We live in a society that is constantly, relentlessly competing for our attention. It's literally a battleground for our focus. And if we aren't incredibly careful, we end up prioritizing all the wrong things simply because they happen to be the loudest and flashiest things in the room. Just look at the fleeting distractions our media-driven society throws at us every single day. We're constantly fed a diet of social media influencers, adored movie stars and athletes placed high up on pedestals. The media is just pushing these temporary idols at us 24/7. And the danger, as the fellowship rightly points out, is that these distractions can subtly, quietly guide our hearts in the exact wrong direction. Before we know it, we start chasing these temporary things instead of focusing on our true spiritual purpose. So we have to really weigh these two realities against each other. On one hand, you have temporary, fleeting media idols, people and trends that come and go in a blink, and as one speaker noted, are sometimes just straight up trash for our spiritual well-being. On the other hand, you have the steady rock, the solid foundation, and the moral compass of Jesus. The source material is basically urging us to evaluate our daily focus. Are we building our lives on the shifting sands of media trends, or on the permanent, unsearchable riches of the Spirit? Okay. So keeping God as our rock and avoiding modern idols is simple in theory, right? But honestly, it is seldom easy in practice. We're human. We fail. Our flesh fails, just like that psalm said at the very beginning. We get distracted by problems, by challenges, or just by the next shiny object. But the fellowship wrapped things up with this absolutely vivid, beautiful metaphor: God's long arms. There's this saying they discuss, that God doesn't have short arms, he has long arms. Meaning, even when we get totally distracted, even when we fail and stray far away from the sanctuary, his reach is always long enough to pull us back in. He is a God of love and consolation. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to reflect on today. When the world completely exhausts you, and when you inevitably fall, will you let the long arms of God catch you?